Welcome to the History Maps podcast. You likely use concepts every single day without, ever stopping to consider the specific historical machinery that produced them.
Right. I mean, if you write down a number using a decimal system, or if you use the mathematical placeholder we call zero to perform a calculation.
Or even if you read a narrative to a child, where animals are used to teach a complex political or moral lesson, you are interacting directly with the intellectual output of a highly specific time and place.
It is entirely woven into the fabric of modern life, but it's often completely separated from its origins in the Indian subcontinent.
And the mission for this deep dive into our Indian history series is to completely unpack that exact time and place. We are looking at the Gupta Empire,
Which was a massive political and cultural juggernaut. It spanned roughly from the late 3rd century to 550.
and the objective here is not just to track who fought whom, but to really understand the mechanisms. How did a singular dynasty unite a deeply fragmented subcontinent?
Exactly. And more importantly, how did they engineer an environment that resulted in such an unprecedented volume of intellectual output?
To understand the sheer magnitude of what the Guptas built, it's necessary to examine the macro view of the Indian subcontinent immediately prior to their emergence.
Right. So if we look at the period before the 3rd century, the geopolitical landscape was dominated by massive political entities.
You had the Kushan Empire controlling the north and stretching into Central Asia.
And you had the Satavahana Empire dominating the Deccan Plateau in the south.
These were vast, wealthy empires that facilitated international trade,
Yeah, and they maintained rigid regional stability. But by the middle of the 3rd century, both of those centralized powers had fractured and declined.
which creates a massive power vacuum. When those large empires recede, what does the day-to-day political reality actually look like on the ground?
Well, the subcontinent essentially breaks down into a mosaic of regional powers. It becomes highly fragmented.
So you have various independent republics, smaller monarchies, and tribal confederacies all vying for local dominance.
Precisely. There is no paramount authority capable of keeping northern India politically united or enforcing a standardized economic system across large distances.
And trade routes become more dangerous to travel, local conflicts become more frequent, and economic growth is consequently stunted.
It is exactly out of this fragmented, highly volatile landscape, specifically from the highly fertile plains of the Ganges River, that the Guptas emerge.
Which raises an immediate question about the mechanics of power. How does a family that appears to have fairly modest origins manage to consolidate such massive authority?
It's a complex process, because when you look at the late 3rd century, around the year 275, the founder of this dynasty is a figure named Sri Gupta.
And his origins are deeply ambiguous in the historical record, right?
They are very ambiguous. The historical sources trace their geographical beginnings to the Magadha region.
Today, this area encompasses parts of present-day Uttar Pradesh and Bihar.
Right. It is a region with a long history of imperial power, having been the seat of the Mauryan Empire centuries earlier.
Now, the early rulers of this family, Sri Gupta, and his immediate successor, his son Ghatotkacha, utilized the title Maharaja.
Which translates directly to Great King.
On the surface, that sounds like a claim to absolute power.
It sounds definitive, sure, but in the highly nuanced political vocabulary of the 3rd century, it often indicated a lesser status.
A ruler calling himself Maharaja was likely independent, but not a paramount sovereign.
Exactly. They were regional rulers, perhaps even subordinate to a larger remaining power in the early days. They were not yet claiming universal sovereignty over the subcontinent.
They were systematically building a localized base of operations.
But there's physical evidence suggesting they were laying the groundwork for something much larger.
Yeah, recent numismatic research provides a tangible look at how Sri Gupta operated. There is a specific hoard of over 100 silver coins that was found in the Hajipur-Muzaffarpur region.
Right in the core territory of ancient Magadha.
And these coins physically bear the legend Sri Gupta in the ancient Brahmi script, stamped right alongside a portrait bust.
And the physical location of that hoard, combined with the specific nature of the coins, is a critical piece of evidence.
Because these are not crude, localized tokens.
No, not at all. These coins demonstrate strict uniformity in their physical typology and their silver standard. That level of uniformity is never accidental in the ancient world.
It requires a functioning state apparatus. You have to secure a steady supply of silver bullion.
You have to operate mints with skilled metallurgists who can ensure a consistent weight and purity.
And you have to have the authority to force merchants to accept this stamped metal as legal tender.
Right. It reflects deliberate, highly organized state issuance. It is not a mere imitation of an older currency from the Kushan era.
I mean, it functions very much like a modern startup, securing its own independent financial backing to establish market dominance.
That's an apt comparison. By systematically issuing uniform silver coins, Srigupta was making a definitive declaration of sovereign authority.
He was stepping into the economic space left empty by the decline of the Kushans and establishing that his family controlled the regional economy. He was setting the rules for commerce.
And that is the exact mechanism of early state building. You assert a distinct political identity by fulfilling local economic demands for a reliable currency.
The economic and political foundation, built by Srigupta and subsequently expanded by his son Gatotkacha, created the platform required for the first truly imperial figure of the dynasty to emerge.
Right, which brings us to Chandragupta I.
Chandragupta I reigns from 319 to 335, and the sources show he immediately discards the title of Maharaja.
Because it is no longer sufficient for his ambitions, he upgrades his title to Maharaja Raja.
Great King of Kings.
It is a definitive elevation in claimed status. He is announcing that he is no longer just a regional ruler. He is a sovereign to whom other kings must bow.
But he does not rely solely on a new title or military force to elevate the dynasty's standing. He utilizes a highly calculated sociological strategy.
Right, he marries Kumaradevi.
She is a princess of the Lichavi clan, operating out of the territory near present-day Nepal.
Yes, and when reviewing the sources on this, it might seem like a standard royal marriage. Kings marry princesses to secure borders all the time.
So why is this specific marriage highlighted as the crucial turning point that changes the entire trajectory of the Gupta family?
Well, it requires an understanding of the rigid social hierarchy of the period. The historical consensus strongly suggests that the Guptas were of the Vaishya Varna.
And in the traditional social stratification system, the Vaishyas are associated with agriculture, mercantile activities, and trade.
Right. They were wealthy, they were influential, but they were not traditionally the ruling martial class.
The Lichavis, conversely, were an ancient, deeply entrenched, and highly prestigious Kshatriya family.
The Kshatriyas being the traditional warrior and ruling class.
Exactly. In the eyes of the Orthodox society of the time, legitimate imperial rule was the domain of the Kshatriyas.
So, by arranging this marriage to Kumaradevi, Chandragupta I is acquiring something that his silver coins and his local armies could not buy.
Orthodox political legitimacy.
Yes. It grafts the wealth and ambition of the Guptas onto the ancient, undeniable prestige of the Lichavis.
It firmly establishes their unquestionable right to rule at an imperial level.
And the Gupta administration ensures that this alliance is broadcast to the entire kingdom. We see the issuance of joint coinage.
These are gold coins featuring the physical likeness of both Chandragupta I and Queen Kumaradevi standing together.
With the name of the Lichavi clan explicitly inscribed on the reverse.
It is a highly effective piece of state propaganda distributed directly into the pockets of the merchants and nobles.
It communicates the legitimacy of the dynasty with every financial transaction.
Through this combination of economic standardization and sociological maneuvering, Chandragupta I secures the base.
By the year 321, his direct territory extends from the Ganges River all the way to Prayaga. He successfully constructs a highly functional, wealthy principality.
But it is his successor who takes that stable principality and weaponizes it, turning it into a vast, continent-spanning empire.
We are looking now at his son, Samudragupta, who holds power from 335 to 375.
Historians frequently refer to him as the Napoleon of India. And when you evaluate the geographical scope of his military campaigns, the comparison makes sense.
The specific details of his expansion are meticulously documented on a massive stone structure known as the Allahabad Pillar inscription.
This text was composed by his own court poet and minister of peace and war, a man named Harisena.
And the physical artifact of the Allahabad Pillar is one of the most revealing objects surviving from ancient India. The text is important, but the physical stone itself tells a complex story about political ideology.
Because Samudragupta did not quarry this stone himself, it was a pre-existing monument.
Right. It was an ancient, highly visible sandstone tiller, originally erected by the Mauryan Emperor Asoka several centuries prior.
Asoka is historically renowned for his severe turn toward peace and his promotion of Buddhist principles following the exceptionally bloody Kalinga War.
He had his edicts of non-violence and ethical governance carved deeply into this very stone.
And centuries later, Samudragupta's court poet, Harisena, uses the exact same stone pillar to carve classical, highly polished Sanskrit, detailing an unrelenting, aggressive series of military conquests.
You have the ancient edicts of nonviolence sitting right next to a glowing, detailed account of an efficient military machine.
It is a striking visual representation of how the requirements of statecraft had shifted.
And Harisena's inscription is not merely a poetic boast. It is a highly specific administrative document.
It specifically lists the states, the individual kings, and the tribal confederacies that the Gupta army subdued.
It operates as a meticulously categorized ledger of empire building.
The inscription systematically breaks down Samudragupta's conquests into 4 highly distinct categories.
Which proves that the Gupta military and administrative apparatus did not utilize a rudimentary one-size-fits-all approach to territorial expansion.
It was a highly calculated, varied strategy based on geography and resource management.
Let's examine the mechanics of those 4 categories because they reveal exactly how you manage a continent without modern communication.
The first category is referred to as the Dakshina paths, encompassing the southern region of the subcontinent.
The pillar explicitly lists 12 different kings in the south who were captured by the Gupta army, but crucially, they were not executed.
They were liberated and reinstated to their thrones. They became tributary states.
The logistics dictate the strategy here. Samudragupta marches his forces south, defeats these regional powers to comprehensively prove his absolute military dominance, and then stops.
He recognizes the administrative impossibility of trying to directly govern and tax territories that are located weeks or months away from his capital in Pataliputra.
Right, stationing permanent Gupta garrisons that far south would drain the treasury.
So he extracts massive immediate wealth through plunder, demands ongoing financial tribute, forces them to acknowledge Gupta supremacy, and then leaves the local administrative structures entirely intact.
Which leads directly to the second category listed on the pillar Aryavarta, which is the northern region.
The strategy applied here is the exact opposite. 8 specific kings in the north were not liberated or made into tributaries.
The text indicates they were violently exterminated and their lands were directly and permanently annexed into the Gupta Empire.
That is because the north, specifically the upper Gangetic Valley and central India, represented the core of the empire.
This was the agricultural engine and the primary economic heartland.
To maintain absolute, unchallengeable power, the Gupta administration required direct, unquestioned control over the taxation and the agricultural output of this specific region.
There was no room for semi-independent tributary kings in the core. Any potential rival had to be physically removed and their administrative apparatus replaced by Gupta officials.
The third category listed by Harisena involves the forest states. The inscription states plainly that the rulers of these regions were reduced to complete servitude.
These were the tribal regions, primarily located in central India and the Deccan.
They often occupied the difficult, heavily forested terrain that contained crucial resources like timber and elephants.
And more importantly, they sat directly astride the major trade routes connecting the wealthy core to the southern territories.
By bringing these specific states into strict servitude, Samudragupta effectively secured the internal supply lines and the commercial arteries of the empire.
And finally, the fourth category details the border states and the islands.
This includes 5 distinct border states, such as Kamarupa in modern-day Assam and regions in Nepal.
It also includes 9 tribal republics and various foreign entities like the remnants of the Kushanas in the northwest, the Sakas, and even Sinhala, which is modern-day Ceylon or Sri Lanka.
The mandate for this group was to pay all forms of taxes, obey the orders of the Gupta emperor, and offer personal obeisance at the court.
This final category represents the sphere of influence. These entities were not directly administered, but they were brought firmly within the Gupta political and economic orbit.
They recognized that resisting Gupta demands would invite the fate of the northern kings.
When you look at the totality of these 4 categories, it operates exactly like a massive franchise system.
Right. The central government does not attempt to own and operate every single location directly.
That would cause an immediate administrative collapse due to the sheer cost of maintaining the required bureaucracy and military presence.
Instead, Samudragupta utilizes direct corporate control.
Establishes tributary states. Those local kings are essentially the
They
franchisees.
acknowledge the Gupta brand, they pay their franchise fees in the form of heavy tribute, and they manage their own day-to-day local operations.
It is the only viable method for an ancient empire to achieve massive scale without immediately fracturing under its own weight.
Samudragupta strictly understood his logistical and financial limits, and after cementing this highly complex, layered expansion, he performs a ritual to make his dominance religiously undeniable.
He executes the Asvamedha, the traditional Vedic horse sacrifice.
He issues a specific series of gold and silver coins bearing the legend restorer of the Asvamedha to ensure the entire economy is aware of it.
The actual mechanics of this ritual are staggering when you think about the confidence it requires.
The Asvamedha is the ultimate ritual assertion of a monarch's unquestionable authority.
Right. The state consecrates a specific horse. That horse is then allowed to roam entirely free for the duration of a full year.
A contingent of the king's elite warriors follows the horse wherever it wanders.
If the horse crosses the border into the territory of another king, that local ruler faces a binary choice.
He must either submit to the emperor and join the procession, or he must mobilize his army and fight the warriors protecting the horse.
By successfully performing this year-long ritual, Samudragupta visually and physically demonstrated that no local ruler on the subcontinent dared to challenge his military supremacy.
Yet analyzing the sources reveals a sharp duality to his reign. The Allahabad inscription is not solely a ledger of violence.
It dedicates significant space to praising his polished intellect, his distinct poetic skill, and his high proficiency in music.
The text actually bestows upon him the title Kavi Raja, which translates to the king of poets.
And we possess physical artifacts that corroborate this cultural positioning.
Among the extensive and highly varied coinage issued during his reign, there is a specific type of gold coin that depicts Samudragupta not in armor and not holding a weapon.
He is depicted comfortably seated on a high-backed couch, playing the veena, a traditional Indian stringed instrument similar to a lute.
Minting a coin is a deliberate choice of state messaging. Usually, ancient coinage portrays a ruler with a sword, a spear, or riding a war horse to project strength.
Exactly. To dedicate the resources to portray the emperor playing a musical instrument communicates a highly specific set of cultural values to the populace.
It communicates the concept of the complete ideal sovereign.
He is demonstrating that he possesses the martial strength to crush any rebellion, but he also possesses the refinement to patronize the arts, literature, and intellectual pursuit.
This deliberate promotion of classical culture becomes the defining characteristic of the Gupta dynasty.
Furthermore, he demonstrated a calculated religious tolerance. He was personally an ardent follower of Vaishnavism, yet the sources indicate he patronized the highly influential Buddhist scholar Vasubandhu.
The diplomatic records also show he granted explicit permission and likely resources to the Buddhist king of Ceylon, Meghavarman, to construct a massive monastery at Bodh Gaya, the site of the Buddha's enlightenment.
So the central administration is balancing international diplomacy, managing complex religious institutions, cultivating high art, and operating a massive military machine all at once.
However, even with this unprecedented success, there is a glaring geographical gap. Samudragupta conquered the east, he secured the north, and he extracted tribute from the south.
But the western seaports were completely out of his reach.
Right, the western territories, encompassing modern-day Gujarat and the Kathiawar Peninsula, remained under the firm control of the Sakas, specifically the western satraps.
This geographical reality meant the Gupta Empire, despite its massive wealth, did not have direct, untaxed access to the highly lucrative maritime trade routes operating out of the Arabian Sea.
That geographical problem dictates the primary strategic objective for the next phase of the empire.
We look now at his successor, Chandragupta II, who rules from roughly 376 to 415.
He adopts the title Vikramaditya, and historical analysis universally points to his reign as the absolute zenith, the structural and cultural high watermark of the Gupta period.
He clearly inherited his father's understanding of military logistics. But Chandragupta II is distinguished by how he integrated that military capability with highly patient, calculated geopolitical diplomacy.
He recognized that simply marching a large army westward into Saka territory was too risky. He had to prepare the diplomatic chessboard before initiating a military campaign.
The central component of that preparation was the Vakataka alliance. He arranges the marriage of his own daughter, Prabhavati, to the Vakataka prince Rudrasena II.
The Vakataka kingdom occupied the Deccan Plateau in central India. Their geographical position was highly strategic.
Exactly. If Chandragupta II intended to march his main military forces toward the western coast, he would leave his southern flank completely exposed.
The marriage to the Vakataka prince guaranteed the security of that southern border, ensuring no hostile force could attack the Gupta core while the army was deployed in the west.
The situation evolves dramatically when Prince Rudrasena II dies prematurely.
Prabhavati, the Gupta emperor's daughter, essentially assumes the role of regent. She becomes the virtual ruler of the entire Vakataka kingdom, managing the state apparatus on behalf of her young son.
Traditional historical narratives often reduce her to a mere pawn, suggesting she was just acting under the direct orders of official advisors dispatched from her father's court.
But reviewing the materials, that interpretation seems too simplistic. Does the mechanism of this arrangement actually demonstrate a highly sophisticated implementation of covert, indirect rule over a massive territory?
It absolutely demonstrates complex statecraft. Reducing Prabhavati to a passive pawn ignores the agency required to manage a kingdom.
This was the integration of a strategically vital, massive territory into the Gupta sphere of influence without the financial drain of a military conquest.
Prabhavati actively issued her own land charters and managed the regional economy, though she certainly did so with the technical and administrative assistance of high-ranking Gupta officials embedded in her court.
So Chandragupta II successfully utilized the geopolitical reality of his daughter's regency to exercise deep, indirect control over central India.
He secures an entire kingdom without paying for a single soldier.
And with that southern flank totally locked down, he initiates the military campaign against the Saka satraps in the west.
The conflict was protracted, but the outcome was decisive. The Gupta military completely defeated Rudrasimha III, who was the last ruling Saka satrap.
The Gupta forces dethroned him, executed him, and formally annexed the territories of western Malwa and the Kathiawar Peninsula directly into the administrative structure of the Gupta Empire.
Following this victory, Chandragupta II performed the horse sacrifice and assumed the title Sakari, translating to destroyer of Sakas.
The military victory is clear, but the mechanism of the economic prize is what actually transforms the empire. This was not merely the acquisition of more farmland.
No, the annexation of the West fundamentally restructures the Gupta economy.
By defeating the Sakas, the Gupta administration gained direct, undisputed control over the major Arabian seaports, specifically cities like Broch, Sappara, and Cambay,
Which connects them directly to the vast maritime networks leading to the Roman Empire and the Middle East.
If you trace the journey of a commodity before this conquest, how did it work?
Well, prior to the conquest, if a merchant in the Gupta core wanted to export goods to the West, those goods had to physically pass through Saka territory.
That meant the Saka administration levied heavy transit taxes, tariffs, and intermediary fees on every single wagon. It severely limited the profit margins.
Following the conquest, the highly sought-after commodities produced within the Gupta Empire, the exceptionally fine cotton clothes of Bengal, the mass quantities of indigo cultivated in Bihar,
The high-grade silk from Benares, the exotic scents and resins from the Himalayas.
all of these could be transported directly from the interior to the western ports along secure roads entirely controlled by the Gupta state.
No middlemen, no foreign tariffs.
The resulting economic boom was so overwhelming that the existing administrative infrastructure could not handle it.
The city of Ujjain had to be elevated to the status of an alternative capital, just to process the sheer volume of commercial administration and taxation generated by this new trade route.
The sheer volume of wealth flowing into the state treasury at this juncture must have been astronomical.
We possess physical artifacts that perfectly encapsulate this era of unchecked power, most notably the Iron Pillar located in the Quad complex in Delhi.
This pillar bears a Sanskrit inscription detailing the military exploits of a king named Chandra, who is described as having conquered enemies from the Hindu Kush mountains in the far northwest all the way to the delta of Bengal.
The consensus among historians is that the Chandra referenced in the inscription is Chandragupta II.
By this stage, the territorial boundaries of the empire stretched from the Arabian Sea in the west to the Bay of Bengal in the east.
And from the foothills of the Himalayas down to the Narmada River in the south.
But the inscription on the iron pillar is not actually the most revealing aspect of the artifact. It is the metallurgy.
This pillar was forged over 1,600 years ago. It has been standing exposed to the elements, to the intense heat and the monsoon rains of Delhi for 16 centuries, and it is not rusted.
That is the true testament to the capabilities of the Gupta era. The preservation of the iron pillar is a result of highly advanced ancient metallurgical techniques.
The ironsmiths of the period utilized a process that did not completely melt the iron, but rather reduced it using charcoal.
Right, and this specific method left a high concentration of phosphorus in the metal.
When this high phosphorus iron was exposed to the specific climate of Delhi, it catalyzed the formation of a microscopic, passive protective film.
A layer of iron hydrogen phosphate hydrate. This layer continuously regenerates and completely shields the underlying iron from oxidation.
It is a level of material science that modern metallurgists study today.
It proves that they were not just accumulating wealth, they were actively funding highly complex scientific and engineering research.
The unprecedented surplus of wealth generated by the western seaports provided the economic stability and the massive royal patronage necessary to trigger a cultural explosion.
We transition now into what is universally recognized as the cultural and intellectual renaissance of the Gupta era.
The political stability enforced by the military, combined with the immense surplus wealth collected from global trade, engineered an environment where the arts, advanced mathematics, and classical literature were actively cultivated by the state and elevated to enduring standards.
Let's examine the output of this renaissance, starting with literature and drama. This specific period sees the absolute maturation and flourishing of classical Sanskrit.
It shifts from being purely a liturgical language to the primary medium for complex poetry, courtly drama, and statecraft manuals.
You have literary figures like Kalidasa. His works, specifically Abhijnana Shakuntalam and Meghadutam, are still studied globally for their structural complexity and emotional depth.
Kalidasa is widely considered the apex poet and dramatist of the Sanskrit language. His ability to weave human emotion with the natural landscape was unparalleled.
But the intellectual environment supported a wide variety of genres. You have playwrights like Visakadatta, who authored Mujarakshasa.
This is not a romance. It is a tense, highly complex political thriller detailing the machinations and espionage of statecraft.
You also have Sudraka, whose play Mishakatakam, the Little Clay Cart, provides a highly realistic, vibrant depiction of urban life.
Dealing with impoverished merchants, courtesans, and a corrupt legal system.
Then there's a development of didactic prose, most famously the Panchatantram compiled by Vishnu Sharma. This is a vast collection of interlinked animal fables.
It is very easy for a modern reader to look at the Panchatantram and simply classify it alongside Aesop's fables, just simple stories where animals talk and act out basic human scenarios.
But that misinterprets the fundamental mechanism of the text. The Panchatantram was explicitly engineered as a sophisticated manual of political science.
Vishnu Sharma utilized the framework of animal stories to instruct young, often unruly princes in the complex realities of statecraft, military strategy, and practical governance.
It is a highly effective pedagogical framework. Rather than forcing young royals to memorize dry, theoretical treatises on alliances and warfare, the text teaches through narrative consequence.
A story about a lion and a hare, or a war between crows and owls, is used to demonstrate the mechanics of deceit,
The necessity of temporary alliances, and the dangers of trusting an enemy.
Its effectiveness is proven by its vast dissemination. It was translated into Middle Persian, Arabic, and eventually found its way into various European literary traditions, deeply influencing global storytelling.
The intellectual output extended far beyond literature. The advancements in science and mathematics generated during the Gupta period form the absolute bedrock of modern global society.
We must examine the work of Aryabhata.
The specific mathematical and astronomical models proposed by Aryabhata are monumental. In his primary treatise, the Aryabhatya, composed around the year 499, he codified concepts that fundamentally altered human calculation.
The most critical of these is the formalization of zero as a distinct mathematical placeholder.
Let's explain the mechanism of why that matters. Without a placeholder 0, how do you differentiate between the number 15 and the number 105 in a written calculation?
Without a positional placeholder, you have to rely entirely on context, which makes complex, multivariable calculations almost impossible.
By conceptualizing 0 not just as nothing, but as a spatial necessity within a sequence of numbers, Aryabhata enables a highly functional decimal positional system.
This specific structural shift in mathematics is the prerequisite for the later development of algebra, calculus, and essentially all modern computing.
He also calculated a highly precise approximation of pi, arriving at 3.1416.
But perhaps the most conceptually staggering proposition in the Aryabhatya is his astronomical model. He proposes a heliocentric theory.
He deduces, through mathematical calculation and observation of the stars, that the Earth is a sphere and that it rotates on its own axis.
which is the actual cause of the apparent daily movement of the stars across the sky.
To propose a rotating spherical Earth in the year 499 requires a profound leap in logical deduction and a total departure from the prevailing orthodox views of the cosmos.
He also correctly identified that the moon and the planets shine entirely due to reflected sunlight.
And he provided the mathematical calculations to accurately predict both solar and lunar eclipses, dispelling the mythological explanations involving demons swallowing the sun.
The era also produced scholars like Varahamihira, whose comprehensive work, Panchasiddhantika, systematically compiled, reviewed, and advanced all the major astronomical knowledge of the period.
The state fostered an environment that rewarded this kind of dynamic empirical inquiry.
This prevailing atmosphere of high confidence and massive resources inevitably alters the physical landscape through art and architecture.
Prior to the Gupta era, major stone architecture in the subcontinent was heavily dominated by rock-cut caves, literally carving temples and monasteries out of existing mountainsides.
The Guptas alter the structural paradigm. We see the large-scale initiation of freestanding structural Hindu temples.
They transition from the subtractive process of carving a mountain to the additive process of building upward utilizing dressed stone and fired brick.
The structural temples engineered during this period introduced elements like towers, known as shikaras, and highly elaborate sculptural doorways.
These innovations established the foundational architectural blueprint for later Hindu temple design across the subcontinent.
A prime surviving example is the Dashavatara temple located at Deoghar, which is dedicated to Vishnu.
It is one of the earliest surviving freestanding masonry temples, featuring highly intricate, deeply carved sculptural reliefs that narrate mythological epics.
And the artistic mastery extended to painting, most notably the extensive murals preserved in the Ajanta caves in Maharashtra.
The Ajanta murals represent the absolute pinnacle of ancient Indian painting.
The artists employed highly sophisticated techniques, utilizing mineral pigments to depict complex religious narratives, courtly processions, and intricate details of textiles and jewelry.
The artists demonstrated a mature understanding of shading and perspective to give three-dimensional volume to the figures.
And they applied this technical mastery to metallurgy on a massive scale. We discussed the metallurgical anomaly of the iron pillar, but they also engaged in monumental metal casting.
There is a surviving copper image of the Buddha recovered from Nalanda that stands roughly 18 feet high.
There is also the Sultanganj Buddha, which is over 7 feet tall and weighs over 1,000 pounds.
The technical infrastructure required to execute lost wax casting on that scale is immense.
You have to sculpt the massive core, encase it in wax, build a massive outer mold, and then continuously pour hundreds of pounds of perfectly molten copper in a single uninterrupted event.
Right, to prevent the metal from cooling unevenly and fracturing. It requires extreme industrial coordination.
All of this, the poetry, the calculation of planetary orbits, the massive copper statues, the continent-spanning trade networks, forces me to question the actual daily mechanics of the state.
If you were the emperor sitting in Pataliputra, how does the government actually function day to day?
How do you maintain the roads, collect the taxes, and fund the foundries across thousands of miles of territory without the entire system collapsing into corruption and chaos?
You construct an administrative machinery that strikes a highly delicate balance. It must be rigid enough at the center to enforce royal authority, but decentralized enough at the local level to adapt to vastly different geographical and cultural realities.
The Gupta administrative framework provided exactly that mechanism. It was a deeply layered, highly structured bureaucracy.
Let's trace the chain of command from the top down. At the absolute apex is the empire, ruled by the Maharaja Raja, who claimed divine sanction for his authority.
To manage the vast territory, the empire was partitioned into massive provinces, known administratively as bhuktis.
These bhuktis were enormous, roughly equivalent to modern states. They were governed by high-ranking officials designated as uparikas.
The uparika was often a prince or a highly trusted member of the royal family.
Their primary mandate was the maintenance of law and order within the province, the mobilization of local military forces if required, and overseeing the massive provincial revenue collection apparatus.
Moving down the hierarchy, those massive bhuktis were subdivided into smaller administrative districts known as vishyas.
The official placed in charge of a vishya was the vishyapati.
The Vishyapati was typically appointed by the provincial Ukarika, though the emperor retained the right to appoint them directly in critical areas.
And the crucial mechanism to understand here is that the Vishupati did not operate as an isolated dictator.
The administrative records clearly show that prominent members of the local urban elite, the chief merchants, the head of the artisan guilds, the chief scribe, actively participated in the district administration.
That indicates a structural reliance on local participation to keep the machinery moving.
Below the district level, the territory was broken down into smaller clusters of settlements referred to as vithis.
And at the absolute base of the entire administrative pyramid is the grama, the individual village.
The village was the fundamental unit of the agricultural economy. They were administered by local functionaries holding titles like Gramika or Gramatiaksha.
At this foundational level, we see significant democratic mechanisms in action. The village assemblies, known as Grama Sabhas, composed of village elders, made the actual day-to-day decisions.
Decisions regarding local land disputes, irrigation management, and local taxation.
The central empire rarely interfered with the Grama, so long as the designated tax revenue flowed upward.
To ensure that revenue flowed, and to manage the vast bureaucracy, the state required highly specialized officials operating at the imperial level.
The inscriptions repeatedly mention the Mahadandanayakas. These were the officials in charge of justice and penal administration.
They functioned as the supreme judicial authorities below the emperor, possessing the coercive physical power necessary to enforce imperial edicts and judgments across the provinces.
You also have the Senapati, the supreme commander of the military, responsible for the logistics and deployment of the massive infantry, cavalry, and elephant divisions.
The administration also required a Santivigrahika. This translates roughly to the Minister of Peace and War, essentially the chief diplomat and foreign minister.
They managed the complex tributary relationships and negotiated treaties.
And to ensure the emperor knew exactly what the Uparikas and the tributary kings were actually doing, the state operated a vast, formalized espionage network utilizing highly trained spies known as Dutakas.
This intricate bureaucracy was entirely funded by the economy, and the Gupta economy was fundamentally built on highly regulated, extensive trade networks.
Let's visualize the physical reality of that economy. Consider the logistics of a major trade route.
Imagine a massive merchant caravan departing overland from the capital at Pataliputra, initiating the long journey west toward the commercial hub of Mathura.
The wagons are heavily loaded with bulk commodities. You have immense sacks of pungent black pepper and spices from the south, secure crates carrying finely woven Benares silk.
Massive loads of raw copper and forged iron tools, and specialized merchants trading in high-value assets like thoroughbred horses and trained elephants.
The physical infrastructure, the roads, the bridges, the secure way stations, and the wells required to move thousands of pounds of cargo across the subcontinent was continuously maintained by the state.
The state protected the arteries of trade, but the actual regulation of the commercial activity, the setting of prices, and the enforcement of contracts was not handled by the emperor's bureaucracy.
That was the exclusive domain of the Shrenis.
The Shrenis were the highly organized merchant and artisan guilds. The sources suggest they operated almost as parallel economic governments within the cities.
They were deeply entrenched and incredibly powerful. A Shreni regulated its specific industry, whether it was the silk weavers, the oil pressers, or the metal workers.
They maintained strict quality control over manufactured goods. They established binding price controls to prevent market collapse. They operated their own internal courts to settle commercial disputes.
They even possessed their own militia to protect their warehouses and caravans.
The state recognized their authority because the Shrenis provided the essential stability required for a complex market economy to function.
For the vast rural population, this economic exchange occurred primarily at local haats, which were periodic, highly regulated rural markets where surplus agricultural output was bartered or sold for manufactured urban goods.
And facilitating the highest echelons of this commercial activity was a deeply monetized system. The Gupta state minted copious amounts of gold coins known as dinars.
These coins are historically renowned for their absolute metallurgical purity and their high artistic quality.
But functionally, they served a dual purpose. They were a reliable medium of international exchange, but they were also highly mobile tools of royal propaganda.
Continuously circulating images of the kings as invincible conquerors, devout worshippers, and cultured patrons.
The sheer volume and purity of the gold coinage physically reflect an economy operating with immense undeniable surplus wealth.
But when analyzing the economic data and the sources, I encounter a mechanism that seems completely contradictory.
What's that?
The historical texts repeatedly indicate that lending capital at exceptionally high rates of interest was a standard, widespread practice during the Gupta era.
Ah,
I have to question this. Generally, in economic history, a high interest rate indicates massive risk, severe inflation, or a critical lack of available capital.
true.
This was undeniably an era characterized by massive surplus wealth and stability. Why were the interest rates punishingly high?
It is a valid contradiction to highlight, but it requires contextualizing within the specific mechanics of ancient venture capitalism.
Okay, walk me through the mechanism of how high interest rates signal a booming economy.
High interest rates during the Gupta era do not indicate systemic poverty or a lack of capital. On the contrary, they reflect an aggressively expanding, highly monetized commercial economy.
Us.
Consider the position of a merchant guild attempting to fund a maritime expedition from the newly captured western ports to Southeast Asia, or outfitting a massive overland caravan bound for the Silk Road.
The initial capital required to purchase the goods, hire the guards, and outfit the ships is immense.
The physical risk of shipwrecks or banditry is high. However, if that expedition succeeds and returns with foreign luxury goods, the potential return on investment is absolutely astronomical.
The profit margins were so massive that merchants willingly borrowed vast sums of capital at high interest rates.
Fully knowing that the profits from a single successful voyage would easily cover the exorbitant cost of the debt and still leave them incredibly wealthy.
The massive demand for liquid capital to fund these highly lucrative, aggressive trading ventures is what drove the interest rates up. It is the hallmark of a booming, risk-taking commercial sector.
That reframes it perfectly. It is high-stakes venture capitalism operating on a global scale.
But there is another specific administrative practice detailed in the sources that I want to challenge, because it seems mathematically self-destructive to the central government. I'm referring to the agrahara system.
The practice of the state issuing formal land grants.
Exactly. The central administration would grant entire tax-exempt villages to specific groups of Brahmins or to large temple complexes.
Yes, that was common.
If the entire machinery of the empire, the army, the bureaucracy, the royal foundries is funded entirely by agricultural revenue,
Right.
how is giving away permanent tax-exempt land grants not financially ruinous for the crown? You are permanently severing vital streams of tax income.
If you view it purely as a modern tax auditor looking at a balance sheet, it appears as a permanent loss of revenue. But the Gupta administration was exceptionally pragmatic.
And the mechanism of these grants was highly calculated.
If we analyze the specific legal language inscribed on artifacts like the Buddha-Gupta copper plate, we can see the exact terms of the agrahara system.
The emperor did legally transfer the right to collect the surface agricultural revenue to the Brahmin or the temple.
However, the state explicitly retained all residual and subterranean sovereign rights.
What does the retention of residual rights mean in practical economic terms?
It means the emperor gave away the grain, but kept the gold.
The state strictly retained ownership and taxation rights over all mineral deposits, all salt production facilities, all hidden treasure discovered on the land, and the rights to extract timber from the forests within those granted territories.
Furthermore, the geographical placement of these grants was highly strategic. The emperor was not giving away the highly developed, hyperproductive farmland immediately surrounding the capital.
They were granting land on the periphery.
Exactly. The agrahara grants were frequently located in remote, heavily forested areas or in newly subdued tribal regions.
By granting this specific, underdeveloped land to highly educated elites or well-funded temple institutions, the state achieves multiple strategic goals simultaneously.
First, it incentivizes the physical clearing of the forests and the aggressive expansion of the agricultural base into virgin territory, which ultimately benefits the broader economy.
Second, it establishes isolated pockets of absolute loyalty and Brahminical Orthodox administration in highly remote, potentially volatile areas.
The temple or the Brahmin becomes a proxy for royal authority, helping to pacify and integrate local tribal populations into the broader cultural and economic framework of the empire.
The agrahara system was not a loss of revenue. It was a highly calculated, long-term investment in regional stability, agricultural expansion, and ideological control.
It binds the local administrative elite directly to the survival of the central authority.
So the decentralized administrative structure, combined with the strategic agrahara land grants, created a highly effective framework for local stability.
The empire could manage a vast continent because it allowed the local components to manage themselves.
However, looking at the long timeline, it becomes evident that the very mechanisms that created this stability also sowed the seeds for the empire's ultimate dissolution.
By continually empowering local governors with autonomous administrative and military capability, and by creating isolated economic zones through land grants, the central authority naturally hollows itself out over time.
That is the perpetual, unsolvable tension inherent in the Gupta model. The strategy of decentralization is exactly what fuels the expansion.
It allows local regions to thrive and innovate without being suffocated by central micromanagement.
But simultaneously, it constructs the very structural vulnerabilities that will inevitably lead to its collapse when placed under severe stress.
And we begin to see that transition as we analyze the reigns of the later rulers, moving from 415 into the 550s.
Following the highly successful reign of Chandragupta II, the throne passes to his son, Kumaragupta I.
His reign is protracted, and for the vast majority of it, the empire maintains its momentum.
The borders are secure, the economy continues to generate immense wealth, and he even performs the Azomeda horse sacrifice to reaffirm his paramount status.
But his most enduring legacy is structural. He provides the initial royal patronage and land grants that lay the foundation for Nalanda University.
Nalanda is perhaps the ultimate manifestation of the Gupta intellectual environment. It was not a simple local monastery or a rudimentary school.
It evolved into a massive, highly structured, international residential university. At its peak, it housed thousands of scholars and students.
The logistics of operating a university of that scale in the ancient world are fascinating. How did it function day to day?
It functioned like a highly autonomous city dedicated entirely to intellect. It was supported financially by the revenue of hundreds of villages granted to it by the state.
The entrance examinations were notoriously rigorous. Only a fraction of applicants were admitted.
Scholars and monks traveled immense distances from Korea, Japan, China, Tibet, and across Central Asia specifically to endure the difficult journey just for the opportunity to study at Nalanda.
The curriculum was exhaustive. They engaged in deep, rigorous debates concerning Buddhist theology, but they also systematically studied highly secular subjects.
Advanced logic, Sanskrit grammar, complex medicine, mathematics, and metallurgy. Nalanda represents the absolute peak of institutionalized learning in the ancient world.
But while the monks are debating advanced logic at Nalanda, the geopolitical reality surrounding the empire begins to rapidly deteriorate.
Toward the very end of Kumaragupta I's reign, the cracks in the decentralized armor begin to show.
The empire faces a severe internal military threat from a highly organized, wealthy tribe known as the Pushyamitras.
The Gupta military manages to suppress the threat, but it requires significant resources.
And this internal instability is immediately followed by a massive, catastrophic external shock. The empire enters the era of the Hunnic invasions.
The geopolitical landscape of Central Asia was experiencing a massive, violent shift.
Skandagupta succeeds to the imperial throne around 455. He is generally evaluated by historians as the last of the truly great, highly capable Gupta emperors.
His entire reign is defined not by cultural patronage or expansion, but by a desperate, highly exhausting existential struggle for the survival of the state.
A specific branch of the nomadic Huns originating from Central Asia, identified in the sources as the Hephthalite Huns or the White Huns, breached the mountain passes of the Hindu Kush.
They cross into the subcontinent and begin a relentless, highly destructive invasion of the northwestern provinces.
The mechanics of fighting a nomadic invasion are entirely different from fighting a settled kingdom.
The disparity in military tactics is what makes the Huns so dangerous. The Gupta military was a massive, highly organized machine built around heavy infantry, armored cavalry, and formidable elephant divisions.
It was designed to fight set-piece battles against other highly structured armies or to conduct slow, methodical sieges of fortified cities.
The Hephthalite Huns did not fight set-piece battles. They were highly mobile, lightly armored, equestrian archers.
They utilized compound bows to inflict massive casualties from a distance, and they relied on speed and terror.
They could strike a city, burn the agricultural surplus, and retreat before the massive Gupta heavy divisions could even mobilize to engage them.
Skandagupta proves to be an exceptional military tactician. The historical records show he personally leads the army and actually manages to inflict severe defeats upon the Huns,
pushing them back across the frontier and saving the core of the empire from immediate annihilation. It is a massive military achievement.
But the structural cost to the empire is fatal.
The defense was successful, but the economic drain was absolute. defending the vast northwestern frontier against repeated, highly mobile nomadic incursions over several decades, completely exhausts the imperial treasury.
Maintaining an army of that size in the field constantly requires an uninterrupted flow of silver and grain.
You can actually track the economic devastation physically in the archaeological record.
If you examine the gold dinars issued toward the end of Skandagupta's reign and into the subsequent decades, the gold content of the coins drops precipitously.
They are heavily debased with cheaper alloys, and the intricate artistic quality of the stamping degrades significantly.
The central administration is financially ruined. The military emergency strains the highly decentralized administrative systems past their breaking point.
The center cannot hold. After Skandagupta's death around 467, the dynasty loses its momentum entirely.
It produces a rapid succession of significantly weaker rulers who lack both the military genius and the financial resources of their predecessors.
You have figures like Purugupta, Narasimhagupta, Buddhagupta, and ultimately Vishnugupta.
Who is the last verified ruler, effectively ending the imperial line around the year 550.
These later rulers were trapped in an impossible situation. They simply did not possess the financial or military leverage required to hold the vast continent-spanning territory together against the dual pressures of continued Hunnic incursions in the west and widespread internal rebellion across the provinces.
And this is exactly where the fundamental vulnerability of the decentralized administrative model triggers the final collapse.
When the central authority was wealthy and powerful, the Uparikas and the tributary kings remained loyal because the consequences of rebellion were total destruction.
But when the treasury is empty and the emperor's army is exhausted by the Huns, that calculus changes instantly. The post-Gupta landscape rapidly and violently fragments.
Because the mechanism for independence was already fully built.
Those provincial governors, the Uparikas we detailed earlier, were already managing their vast territories with an extremely high degree of operational autonomy.
They already possessed their own local administrative bureaucracies, they already controlled the local revenue collection, and they already commanded local militias.
When they realized the central authority in Pataliputra was financially ruined and militarily impotent, they did not have to wage a complex war of independence or build a new government from scratch.
They simply stopped loading the tax revenue onto the wagons bound for the capital. They kept the grain, they kept the silver, and they declared themselves sovereign kings.
Precisely. The decentralized model allowed the former imperial subordinates to seamlessly and instantly transition into independent regional powers.
The subcontinent shatters along those administrative fault lines. We see the rapid rise of independent entities like the Matrakas establishing a kingdom in Vallabhi in the west.
The Gujaras rising to power, an official named Sasanka carving out an entirely independent, powerful kingdom in Bengal, and Pushavarman establishing a new dynastic line in Assam.
The brief era of political unity across northern India evaporates, and the subcontinent returns to the fractured, multi-state reality that existed prior to Srigupta.
It is a dramatic, rapid, structural collapse. But the intellectual and cultural legacy left behind by the machinery of the Gupta state is completely indelible.
Let's synthesize the actual mechanics of what we have explored. We began with a fractured, highly volatile subcontinent.
The Gupta family, utilizing calculated economic standardization, strategic sociological alliances, and brilliant military logistics, managed to construct an empire that blended absolute, divinely sanctioned royal authority at the center with a highly pragmatic, deeply decentralized governance at the local level.
They profoundly understood the logistical limits of the ancient world. By fiercely securing their economic core in the north and utilizing highly effective tributary alliances and strategic marriages on their periphery, they engineered a century of relative political stability.
That stability allowed for the generation of immense, unprecedented economic wealth through secure international trade.
And that immense surplus wealth was systematically directed by the state to fund an era of major cultural advancement.
It provided the resources necessary to produce the enduring classical Sanskrit literature of Kalidasa, the monumental structurally complex architecture at Deogar, and the revolutionary mathematical treatises of Aryabhata.
The administration codified the highly complex mathematics and the conceptualization of zero that we literally use to operate the modern world today.
The institutional stability they built, however fleeting it was in the grand scope of history, provided the necessary physical security and financial breathing room for the human intellect to radically push the boundaries of what was mathematically, philosophically, and artistically known.
It is a testament to what an organized society can produce.
But leaves us with a profound historical paradox regarding the very mechanics of how they governed. I want to leave you, the listener, with a final thought to analyze and mull over.
We spent this time examining how the Guptas utilized a highly sophisticated, deeply decentralized administrative model.
They continually granted massive autonomy, military capability, and tax-exempt land to local officials and regional elites in order to maintain a continent-spanning empire without going bankrupt.
Did the Guptas actually engineer the specific mechanics of their own downfall?
By creating such an incredibly effective, highly functioning, decentralized administrative system, did they train their regional governors so perfectly in the art of statecraft and logistics that the central emperor in Pataliputra eventually just became entirely obsolete. Thank you for listening. History Maps. Learn history visually.